Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 7th and last guild meeting of the year. I'm happy to see all of you here on this beautiful morning. Today, we are honored to have Gerald Cournoyer, an artist and educator, who will present the final program of the year. Gerald is an enrolled member of the Oglala Sioux Tribe, originally from Marty, South Dakota. He attended the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where he received an associate degree in fine arts in painting. He then attended the University of South Dakota, receiving a BFA and master's degree in interdisciplinary studies. He then followed in the footsteps of Oscar Howe, attending the University of Oklahoma, where he achieved his Master's of Fine Arts in painting. Gerald also holds a Master of Arts in Management and currently is working toward a master's degree in philosophy and fundraising from the Central Michigan University. Gerald's artwork is shown is regionally, nationally, and internationally. I would like to introduce and present Gerald Cournoyer to you this morning. Good morning, Gerald.
Good morning. Thank you, John. For the dozens of people watching and the 2 or 3 in the audience, I want to say good morning to you. Am I ready to go? Just dive right in? Okay. Greetings, my relatives. I am his mini bears. We'll go to the next slide. And I was born and raised on the Yankton Reservation. And this is what it looks like down on the river bottom, as we called it. Grew up with no running water and no electricity. We had an outhouse, and my parents raised 14 children. Next slide. So here's my father, and I'm on his right, and my brother Baptiste is on the left, the 2 youngest. And my father would take us all over the place. As the youngest 2, we would always be going with our dad and doing things with our father, so we remember him fondly. Next slide. And this is the whole crew, and my mom is holding her favorite child. There's all 14 of us right there. And growing up as a close-knit family, did everything together, swimming on the river and hiking and killing rattlesnakes and hunting, whatever. Things kids do, ride bikes. And we moved from the colony in the early 70s. We moved to the housing addition right there in Marty. So we were 3 miles from Marty. Next slide. Early on in my career, and this goes back to 2nd grade, and my teacher was Patty Dvorak, and I hope Patty made it on. And she had an impact on me, and she encouraged a little bit of the arts in her classroom, and I gravitated towards that. And she asked us, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I wanted to be an artist, not knowing what that was, but I just saw posters in the hallway. And I decided that would be cool to have my artwork someday on a poster in the hallway of a school, and maybe I would influence up and coming and emerging artists someday. I started with this series like everybody else does. We want to master something, and I was trying to master the portrait. And I tried several different ways, and in the 80s and 90s, this was kind of a thing with the color. A lot of places didn't teach color, and you were just supposed to know that. So a lot of art schools, they didn't teach color. We were already supposed to come there with all of this wealth of knowledge. And I thought that's why you went to school. So I did a whole series of these portrait series of all these Native chiefs. And I felt myself, at some point I was thinking, I'm always painting somebody else's story. When am I going to get to tell my story? Next slide. So you can see the evolution of the painterly process. And just as I start to get into these, I start to add a little bit more and a little bit more. And I tried to make these more modern, make people look like they would be today, but still feeling like I'm telling somebody else's story. Next slide. So I started exploring different artists, and I stumbled upon Nathan Oliveira and Wayne Thiebaud, and I really liked the way they used the color. California artist that influenced Fritz Scholder, who was another influential artist that I looked at growing up, all those years of looking at how people painted and painting our Indian people. So that's a picture of me, kind of a self-portrait, and I'm standing out in an open prairie before selfies became really popular. Next slide. Just taking another from a photograph, just painting, just trying to hone my skills. Like at this point in my career, I felt like this is the only acceptable way to paint Indians. Next slide. So I worked really hard on this piece, and I put probably 40, 60 hours into this. And John Day was the dean of the College of Fine Arts, and so we had lots of conversations, and I'm drawing from several different influences like T.C. Cannon and Dan Dominga at this point in my career. Next slide. So this is when I really actually just broke away from doing a lot of these pieces, a lot of the facial portrait of the Native chiefs, and I was always wondering why people never painted the women. So I painted this, and I gave it to my sister in Marty, Aggie. Gave this one to Aggie. Next slide. And I think I was well underway with abstraction and geometric form at this point. But my sister Faith always loved my works, and so I painted this for her. And she was working at a casino, and I took it in there. I gave it to her, and she put it on her wall, and now it sits in a prominent place in her house. Next slide. This is some of the things that I learned at IAIA, and we did an assignment, and this became part of a series that I was doing, still painting the chief, but it's a monochromatic, and I enjoyed, at that point I was enjoying it because I thought, painting large, I think this is a 3 foot by 4 foot piece, and really honing in on how to use color. Okay, next slide. Getting away from the portrait series and going into what I felt was more emotional and looking at color. And so that interaction of color really became important to me. This is as I got to Oklahoma. Next slide. So I started introducing this tape and just randomly putting it on there, the line. And I start using rule of thirds and all of these things that you learn, technical abilities in college. So I really looked at the color wheel. So now I'm studying, have my own color wheel, and I'm looking at the triad, the dyad, the tetrad, all of the ways that you can mix these certain colors. And I came across a book that talked about when you're sick, certain colors will help you heal. And so I was really fascinated by that. Next slide. So this kind of takes me back to some of those grade school drawing things, and I was just using my whole arm instead of painting just with my hand. I start using the whole arm and painting a distance from the canvas. I had a long brush and I just used my whole arm. And I'm trying to find a balance between the thick and thin line and color. I don't know what was going on, and I see this apple here and I can't remember what I was thinking of. But as kids, as an Indian child on reservation school, this was one of the biggest insults you can throw at somebody. You can call them an apple. They're red on the outside, they're white on the inside. So I don't know what was happening in my life, but I was at the University of Oklahoma, and all of the 39 tribes, and then some of those tribes, they're all open, and they have lots and lots and lots of members. So you could be 1/1000th Cherokee and you're an enrolled member. That might have had something to do with it. Next slide. So I was kind of struggling at this point down at University of Oklahoma, and one of our presenters came for a month, and he presented his artwork, and he did painting demonstrations, and he came to our studio and we started talking, and then he would be teaching us how to use some of the things he does. He painted without a brush. He used a drywall trowel, and he used this thick paint, and used medium. So I started picking up on that. Is this a different way to paint? And I was just experimenting. So grad school is all about experimentation and putting color next to color. And I was kind of finding my way of who I am, where I come from, and all of those sorts of things you do as an artist and as a person, like why are we here? Those kinds of questions. Why was I always interested in the arts? Next slide. I started taking some classes in printmaking, and one of my instructors down there, he talked about the symbology, and he talked about activating each part of the paper and how you can do that. And he was showing us and just teaching, and the way we had our conversations and our critiques. And he really enjoyed, he was fascinated with Native culture and the symbology. And so he would often ask us, Marwan, Brigade, myself, you know, often ask us, you know, what does this mean in your tribe or your culture? Is this a good sign? Is this taboo? What is this? And we were talking about owls. And he said, you know, I want to do an owl. And he looked at me, and I didn't say anything. Marwan didn't say anything. He's just talking about it. He said, what does it mean in your culture? So we both said, it's taboo. You wouldn't do that. I said, you have to be careful. You know, it's seen as a sign of death. And he said, you know, I'm not Native American. And he said, I'm doing this whimsical white owl, snowy owl. And after he completed the series, he went in for a routine operation on his knee. They removed some cartilage or something, and told his wife he didn't feel very well. He stood up and fell over. Blood clot went to his heart and passed away. That's all. So this was actually a palette that was laying on the floor in the studio, and it had all of these different colors on it, but I loved the texture. So I started playing around with all of these colors, and I put globs and globs of paint on there. And I started just one layer after another after another. It's not very big, and this is the result. And my good friend Emanuele Arciuli, world-renowned pianist from Italy, he collected a few pieces of mine, and he asked if I'd let him use this piece, and he used it for one of his CD covers. Next slide. So I guess this would be the jumping off point. I asked by my painting professor, George Hughes. He said, you know what you're doing when you paint the chiefs, the faces, the portraits. He said, you know what you're doing. He said, you could sell those. And he said, but what are you really trying to say? What is your artwork about? Is it about painting pretty pictures, or is it about an actual statement? So what are you trying to do? So we started this conversation about what I wanted to paint about. And it's the way he asked me. He didn't tell me to stop painting the chiefs. He didn't tell me to stop doing anything. He told me to think about something else that had an impact and a meaning that would last longer than these portrait series. So that's what we started this conversation about. And it really helped me to make a break from doing what sold to what has an impact. Next slide. So when I painted, I made these canvases. I would make 10 at a time. And I made 10 at a time because when I pull the canvas from behind and I staple it, my knuckles just above the fingernail all across there, they would start bleeding. And then by the time they're hurting, I'm finished with 10 canvases. So every 2 weeks, I would make 10 new canvases. I tried to wear gloves. It's just not the same feeling. So when I made my 10 canvases, I stretched 10 canvases and that stopped. So every 2 weeks, I made 10 canvases, and it was my mission to be in the studio 12, 16 hours a day, just painting. So I started with the small tubes of paint, and then I'm buying gallons of paint and medium after a while, buying 5 gallons of gesso at a time. So if you know paint's expensive, gesso is expensive, and the gel medium is expensive. So you can imagine the kind of money I'm spending buying my own lumber, taking the time, and it's usually a weekend, a whole weekend when I have my son there to help me. And so as I'm painting, I would go over to a painting that I started. And I would just put excess paint from my drywall trowel onto the piece. And so I kept doing that. And it created some texture in the background, not knowing what any of these pieces were going to be. And as I was doing this, I had a black canvas that I was preparing, and I threw that up on the wall, and I pulled the paint across, and then I threw some white on there on the right-hand side. And this was the result. And one of my critiques, George came in and we were just talking. He said, that looks like a bear. So this became Cutting Edge Bear because he talked about how cutting edge it was. And it was minimalistic. And some of the other students said, how are you getting away with that? You just can't throw that up there and then just leave it. You gotta add something more to it. So underneath, there's a lot of texture from me putting excess paint on it all the way across and making marks with some grout tools that I found at the hardware store. Next slide. So this was a piece that the University of South Dakota has, and when John Day was there. And John always loved my work. So the story of this piece, I entered it into the student show at the University of Oklahoma. And I was really fascinated with the way the color popped through at different places when you put paint on a drywall trowel and you pull it across. So I made these rectangles, and then it has a lot of texture behind it. So I'm putting all of these textures in there with these colors, using different tools, using the whole arm. I'm listening to spiritual music, some of these ceremonial songs on my CD player, really getting into it. So I would always use my sage and some sweetgrass and go around the whole studio before I painted, and I'd say prayers. And then I would really get into what I was doing, get everything ready, and I would just start painting. So I'd get there around 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. I had my routine. So everything was routine. I'd get there, I'd start playing my music, I'd be praying, be smudging, and then I would slowly go into these works. I'd have 4 or 5 of them going at a time because they're so large, using lots and lots of paint. And as I was doing this, I felt like I was in a ceremonial trance. So when you're out there sundancing, you get into that ceremonial trance, and things start appearing to you. So you're denying yourself food and water, your knowledge, everything that's going on. You're so in tune with nature. You're so in tune with what's happening around you. Then everything just kind of, you focus on that one thing. In the Sundance, we focus on a tree. So that's kind of where I felt I was at. So when you Sundance, you walk up and you touch the tree, and then you walk backwards. You're always praying. And so when I paint, I feel like that's what I do. I walk up and I touch this tree of life, and then I walk backwards, and then I'm looking to see what I can do next. It's almost like a trance-like state that I get into. I could be listening to CD after CD after CD, and once it stops, I'm still painting because I'm still there. I'm still in that process. I'm communicating, and this is one of those paintings that I really looked at ceremonials we do, and I wanted to be a part of every ceremony, whatever I could. So we have 7 ceremonials that we participate in. So there's that throwing of the ball, that's for the youth, and then the womanhood ceremony for the women, keeping the soul, making a relative. And so taking part in each one of those, whether it's helping get wood for the womanhood ceremony, or being in the audience as they do the throwing of the ball for the kids, going and doing a hamlecha a couple of times. And I'm starting to tell my own story. So my ancestors were telling these stories, and when Edward Curtis went around, he photographed all of those, the vanishing Indian, because he felt like at some point we would all disappear. And so by being a part of all of the ceremonies, taking a part in the Sundance, going to Sweat Lodge, doing the pipe ceremony, knowing what it means when you offer tobacco, and why that all of these things are so important, about the star quilt and the morning star and all of these connections. That's what I was doing when I was at the University of Oklahoma. I would still participate in South Dakota and all of these ceremonies, and that was coming out in the paintings. So people say, I don't know what your work is about. So I talk about geometric symbolism, the symbology of what I'm doing and how it relates to who we are today. We haven't lost any of our ceremonials. Language is dying because of where we live and how we have to work today. So we just can't be a buffalo hunter forever. We just can't be a medicine man. And people bring us things when we sit and pray with them. So those kinds of things. So today's modern day, as Indian and traditional as we could be, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm still trying to practice that generosity and that courage and wisdom. And I'm still in the process, I guess. We're all a work in progress. So when I finished painting this and I was taking it over to be a part of the student show at Oklahoma, I got a call that my father passed away. So this is one of the last things that I did, and it won first place in the show. This lady that was the juror, she came from the Oklahoma Modern Art Museum. She came down, and one of the ladies that was in the museum said, I was watching her. she came in and she saw your painting and she didn't see anything else. She just walked over to it. And then she would look at it for a long time, and then she'd leave and she'd go look at other pieces, and then she would come back. Look at it for a long time, then she would leave and she would come back. So she did that 5 times, she said, but she had to make sure she put all the winning pieces out, and but she was really drawn to this piece. So it's at the University of South Dakota, probably in the vault, maybe dusty. But that was kind of the history of that piece. I wanted some quill work in there, so I would tape off a section. I would take a tool we used for grout, and I'd put a lot of paint on it and pull it across. So each one of those little lines becomes a prayer. So this is all about prayer. And the color usage is all about spirituality and how we see color as Native people. So the Sioux people, how we see those colors and the interaction of color and that color symbology. Next slide. So I did this while I was at the Oscar Howe Summer Art Institute. I was started as a helper, student helper, then I became the painting instructor, coordinator, then director. And this piece, I saw these, there were just 3 little kind of beadwork design. I would see these three lines red, on a white background, see these 3, and there was a design element. So the more research that I did, it kind of became like the Trinity. So we have a belief that we came from a world underneath this earth. There was a world underneath. Then we came into this world, and then we're going to move on to another world. So when we move on to this other world, we sometimes believe that the other world is beyond the moon, beyond the stars, and it's way up there, and that's where heaven is. And the teachings that we receive is that the next world is as thin as a leaf. So when we talk about walking with our ancestors are right with us, not physically, but their spirit is with us. In spirit, we do all of these things. So I was trying to mimic that, and so I had several different practice tries at this. So I went through 400 yards of canvas while I was at the University of Oklahoma, and just painting. If I wasn't at home, they would see my wife somewhere and they would say, "Where's Gerald?" "He's at the studio." And then it became, "Where's Gerald?" "Oh, he's probably at the studio." I was always covered in, from my shirt to my pants to my shoes. The Great Dane would come over and he'd be running through the studio, and he has paint on him. And then my daughter, who just graduated high school, would have paint on her, and my son would come in for 2 minutes, and then we'd move something in the studio and he'd be full of paint. That's all I did. And for those 2.5 years at the University of Oklahoma, it's just paint. And exploration, learning new things, techniques. So that's what I did. And it was all about spirituality and my journey through this spirituality through painting. So when we think about these symbols, there's a lot of similarities around the world. There is a tree of life. Everybody believes in this tree of life, and they talk about the cross that Jesus was nailed to as a tree of life. So in our Sundance, we have a tree of life. We believe in some sort of smoke, and we cleanse ourselves with this smoke, and we use sage, cedar, sweetgrass, and we cleanse our spirit. We wipe our spirit clean. They do it at the Catholic Church. There's water is a big thing. Nothing can survive without water. And then we talk about just this fasting. Jesus went and fasted for 40 days. So that sort of thing. We do a ritualistic fasting. We're praying, we're singing, we have dances, all of these things. You can find them throughout the world in certain celebrations. Certain times you do certain things. Summer equinox, winter equinox. So you have these celebrations, so you recognize that day and you do special things. And so you pass that on. So the things that were passed on through symbol, everybody could see the symbol in all of these things. We look at a teepee, it looks like a triangle, but actually it's two triangles, one triangle on top of the other triangle. So when you think of that, when you go into a Native American church, the first thing you're doing is you're getting that ground ready, where you're going to be inside the teepee. You get that ready, you measure that out. You get your poles ready, you measure that cover, teepee cover. Then as you raise it, you start putting so many poles on one side, so many poles on the other, and you bring that cover over, then you cover it. And then when you go inside, everything goes to the left. You go all the way around to the left. And then there's this mound in there. It starts real small and it goes up by about 4 inches. It's about 3 inches wide, 4 inches wide. And there's a line drawn on that all the way around. And that goes from when you're first born, infant, all the way around to your teens and 20s, and your 30s, 40s, all the way around to your 80s and 90s. You become, so we say Chachala, we knew Chachala, so that means old man or woman. Chachala just means you're old, so into old age. So it follows that. So every time you go into the Native American church, you go around to the left and you come around to the right, and then you leave on the right hand side. So that's following your life's path. So all of these things. So those two teepees, those two triangles, one on top of the other, a geometric echo. So when you see those together, that is one teepee on the bottom and the next teepee on top. So where they meet is where that next world is. And so this world mimics that next world. So right at that point, so whenever you pull that teepee, you pull it real tight with that rope after you have all the poles on it, then you can just see it tightening up. And when you see that, you watch it, and then you start thinking of all of these things. I do. I start thinking of, that's where our prayers go. Right there is that next world. So when you're in that teepee and they're putting the coals out, and then you start praying, they throw cedar on the coals and everybody blesses themselves. And then you start praying, everybody starts praying, different languages, everybody's praying. And then you watch the smoke go out of the teepee flaps all the way up right there. So very symbolic, lots of symbology in all of these things that we do. And the why. So it was lost when my parents went to boarding school. My grandparents didn't get to teach. They didn't get to parent. My parents went through those 12 years and then they come into parenthood themselves, and they sent their children off to boarding school. So then you're missing this parenting skills. You're missing some of those teachings. You're missing that language, that culture, that history and tradition. How do we get that back? And it wasn't until the 70s when the Indian Mission boarding school officially ended. But that assimilation process had begun all the way back to my great-grandparents. Rounded everybody up, put them on the reservation. You didn't walk anywhere. You gathered firewood and you weren't walking great distances. Then they brought beef to you. So you would shoot a cow and then you go butcher. Instead of following the buffalo herd, instead of picking berries, instead of being very active. So now you become tioka chepa. So they say you put weight on sitting around the house. So we still have those tendencies of eating that way that are the cavalry soldier. So if you think about when you're close to the fort, your diet is beans, your diet is bread, your diet is coffee, sugar, and bacon and fatty cow, instead of those lean meats, instead of walking and exercising. So today we still kind of follow that diet. Whatever is close to us is what we kind of gravitate towards, the fast meals, all of that sort of stuff. And it has ramifications years and years down the road. So we need to go back to some of those traditional ways, some traditional preparation of foods, and learning how to eat more fruits and vegetables, and not so much the fatty fried stuff. So all of these things are kind of wrapped up in all of my research that I was doing. Next slide. So this is actually yellow and some violet. So I was playing with color, and I started listening to some of these stories, reading the stories. And so that pattern, I'm starting to weave together some of these things, and it's the weaving together that became really important to what I was thinking about at the time. And I guess I really got wrapped up in the knowledge. So I have all this hunger for knowledge for whatever reason. I just want to know more and more about what my ancestors went through, and relating it to today, and how we are going through something similar, but it's just a different time. You know, we can't live that way. We have to live in today's world, and learning from those stories, how those traditional things, we're losing some of those, and I want to bring them back through story and through symbol. Next slide. How are we doing on time? Are we good?
We are, it's 10:40, so
Okay.
we'd love to be able to wrap up in 10 minutes or so we can have some time for Q&A.
Okay. I saw this on a piece of parfleche, and it was smaller, of course, and it was connected to a bunch of geometric designs, and it was part of a pattern. And this is a 5 foot by 6 foot, and I just love to blow those things up and to really explore, and of course using color underneath, going back and forth, making things separate by the way you put color beside color. Next one. Just thinking about the way these geometric patterns are interacting and then coming through and creating line. So it was all about the creative process, and I got lost in that. Next slide. So I was thinking about singing, and I went and watched somebody sing at a recording studio, and their voice, when they went real high with their voice and they came down low and just back and forth, back and forth. And I love the interaction of that. And so I started putting these symbols that I had seen and learning about the symbologies, and then doing the positive, negative kind of thing. So you can see that happening in the center. Next slide. So really thinking about how to compose these. And I started looking at my paintings as a music, and I wanted to compose these paintings rather than paint the painting. I wanted to compose things and put things together that made sense to me. Next slide. So right in the center, that's a bird symbol. And looking at all of these different symbologies and how much this bird symbol and what it meant. And it wasn't an eagle, it wasn't a hawk, but everybody paints this. And different birds have different meanings. So I started getting into that. And then just the combination of putting these symbols together. Next slide. So when you buy my paintings, this is what they look like. You put them in your house. This is at Taos, New Mexico. And I had a show there, and I still have an agent in Taos, and we're still in the process of selling works. And this is what I show over in Taos. Next slide. This was called a flock of ravens, and watching these birds interact. And I wanted to make it look like these birds were having a conversation like they do in real life. They're talking to each other. They're telling someone that this person will feed you. So when I got to Silver Spring, Maryland, and I lived on the 17th floor, and I would go outside and I'd put Cheerios on the rail, and every day, every morning, I'd put those out there. And at a certain time, you would see these ravens coming. Sometimes I had 5 or 6 out there just eating some Cheerios, and that happened for about a year. Then we moved. Next slide. So this raven became very important to me, and as I started doing my studying about what it was about this bird, it's not the eagle, it's not the hawk, and so I did my research. I did a lot of reading, and during the ghost dance, when people would be dancing up to 72 hours straight, no food, no water, someone would be singing, and they'd be dancing, they'd be praying. The Europeans would go back to where they came from. The buffalo would come back to life because they were killing off extinction. And then your deceased relatives would come back to life. So all of these things were supposed to happen if you danced, if you prayed, if you saw the symbology and you put it on a shirt. And then you went into battle. No bullet was supposed to penetrate the shirt because you had that belief in them. So all of these things were happening. And then when you fell into this trance-like state, you're so tired, just exhausted, you fall down, and you're laying there, and you can barely move your head and barely open your eyes, and you're just laying there, and these birds would come. And they'd be cawing. They'd just be walking amongst all these people up there, just walking amongst them. And then this conversation was happening. They'd be telling you, this is happening, this will happen. Prepare yourself for this. And so this became this conversation of information. All of this communication was happening. And they would remember these stories and they'd be telling, this happened, I saw this, it just came to me. So even today, I was working in Kyle, and there was this tree close to the house, and this crow came, sat in the tree all morning. I was picking up trash, mowing lawn, took stuff to the dump, got a nail in my tire, noticed it right away. So I slowly drove over, and this man fixed my tire. And he said, $12. I didn't have any cash on me, so I drove home. As I was going out the door, I have a conversation with my wife about, dinner, who knows what. But it was a 2-minute conversation. And then I slowly get out the door, and then I drive back. And whenever I get back, on the way, I'm driving down this dirt road. It has a kind of a corner to it. So I'm driving fairly slow, but I get around this corner and I see all of this dust in the air. I thought tornado. It wasn't a tornado. So I watch, it's dissipating. As I'm getting closer, then I get on the straightaway and I see this car rolling in the ditch, and there's 2 bodies around. And I knew those 2 people were dead, but there were 2 more inside the car. So one guy crawls out, runs to the fence. I stop. He gets to the truck, and then we drive up 200 yards. And I said, run in here and call 911. He said, my grandma lives right there. I'm going to call 911. And then I watch him. He runs past the house, and he keeps going into this big field. So I drive over to my friend, pay him his money. I dial 911. And I have to convince him to come with me. said, there was a wreck. I said, there's 2 people in the ditch. I said, I'm pretty sure they're dead, but there's 1 more in the car. Let's go over there and help them. And he didn't want to come, And then finally, it's like, okay. So he comes with me. We get out there, and just as we get to the fence, here comes the cops, and they tell us to stay back until if we need help. So anyway, we're just standing there. They cover those 2 right away, and they get to the car. So he goes over, he's talking to this young man because he knows him, next door neighbor kind of guy, but just talking to him. So if I didn't have this conversation, I probably would have hit them head on. So I think about those interactions with these birds. And I think about how just that one moment could have changed my life. So that's why I use this bird so often in all of my work. It's a messenger bird. Okay, next slide. This piece went to a show in Oklahoma City, and my friend said, "You have anything new that you can put in the show? And if you go down there, I'm sure you'll get in." And so I did. I took 2 pieces, and then we were watching the news, and they did a piece on this show that was coming up, and they're standing in front of my painting. And then she said, "I should have never told you to go put paintings in this show." Next slide. So this is how I talk about reading these stories, and always with this bird, these messengers. Could be anything. Could be a different kind of bird or whatever. But I really like the raven and the crow and how they were part of the ghost dance. Next slide. So the interaction of color, using the complementary colors, red, green, a little bit of blue to represent that water. Next slide. And then this is this Mesa series, and I think about going through the Badlands and how those striations of those different colors, those pinks and those reds and those whites, that white clay in there, and how that contains uranium, which contaminates the water. Next slide. So I was doing this acrylic on canvas from a sheet of glass, and then you pull the whole entire painting off onto canvas after you finish painting it. And that was a process I learned in Oklahoma. Next slide. So this is about creation story, the use of water, the spilling of the blood in Pipestone, Minnesota. We still use that ceremonial pipe today. That Cat and I make our ceremonial pipes. Next slide. Again, the water creation story, not creation story, just the great flood story and the blood. Next slide. The same thing with this one here, just finding different ways, and I always end up putting in 4 directions. And I showed these last 2 pieces in New York. Next slide. This is the red willow, the Shawshank. So if you've ever gone out to get red willow that you put in your ceremonial pipe, and then again, my messenger. So you take off the bark with a knife, and then you get to that level. There's different colors in there, and then you take that color. It's like either a beige, and then there's an off-white, and you use those and you chop it up. That's what you put in your pipe. You smoke that whenever you sundance or just loading your pipe. That's what you would use. Next slide. And then this is that window series that I did, and I have these different leaves on there, representing that the next life is as thin as leaf. Next slide. So this is that DNA. So I was there was a lot of questions, I guess, concerning DNA, who's Indian, who isn't. That conversation we were having, different circles, and artists were reacting and painting things. So that was my answer to that. Next slide. and then the four directions again, and then just playing with the background and seeing what I could do in the background to make these look interesting. Next slide. So this is Black Mesa, and I lived out near Black Mesa whenever I was in Espanola, and then there was a story that goes along with this, and they cut off the right foot of all of these people during the Pueblo revolt, and so they would never revolt again. So it's a long story. So next slide. This is a black and white, red, white. So living in two different worlds. So whenever you're doing your NAC meetings and different ceremonials, you have a red and white, which is the day and night kind of thing, and then living in two worlds. And then again, your messenger bird is always there giving you messages. And this is at the University of Oklahoma, the Fred Jones Jr. Museum, and it is in the 20th Century Modern Masters Collection. I'm the only Native American in the Modern Master Collection. Next slide. So playing with, I think this is called Gift of Tobacco, and then just playing around with different ways of representing tobacco leaf, and then four directions. So pray with tobacco, four directions, and then your messenger bird. Next slide. This one was in Southwest Art, and it talks about that transformation from caterpillar to butterfly, that metamorphosis, and our Native people were fascinated with animals like the dragonfly. Next. And then this is it's like a crossover piece, living in two worlds. You can take, when you're on the reservation, everybody's native, and then you have a little bit of mainstream society in there, radio, cars, language, and then when you go off reservation on the left side, then you have a little bit of native with you, but you're kind of immersed in modern society. Next slide. And then this is also about taking that tobacco and making an offering, and then that smoke. And that's why it's kind of engraves. Next slide. This is at the University of South Dakota, up in the Munster Center. It's in a tiny room, but this is 5 foot by 12 foot. And I painted this when I was at Oscar Howe Summer Art Institute, kind of in my spare time. Next slide. This is a Jim Dine influence, and I was teaching at Bacone College in Muskogee, Oklahoma, and this is one of my demonstration pieces for my students. Next slide. This is the Raven portrait. I think I call this my good side. Next slide. I don't usually paint like this anymore, but if you want to sell paintings, you have to be Indian. So the only people that really want you to paint like this are the collectors, because they want to keep us in the 1860s, and here we are in 2022. But in order to make some money to live on, you got to do what you got to do. Okay, next slide. This is a different way to look at the portrait of chiefs. So to make money, you have to, everybody's doing the same thing. So how do you differentiate yourself from the next artist? Next slide. Same thing with this. This is a 5 foot by 6 foot. It's all about the process and the journey of learning to fit in. Next slide. This is Indian with coffee cup, kind of after a TC Cannon and Fritz Shoulder. They had beer cans in theirs, and I had a Starbucks coffee in mine. Next slide. This is me a few years ago, young man, and just painting a portrait again of myself and modern modern way. Next one, next slide. So I really got back into geometry, geometric design, and how can I put all of that into this painting. So this is a 4-foot by 5-foot painting. And this is in Taos, New Mexico. Through my butterfly in their metamorphosis. And I have my red, which represents the blood of the people. Next slide. So this is We Are a Horse Nation, and it's a view of a horse from above. Everybody did the standard Indian on the horseback, or in some horse standing by the side. And I knew that's what everybody was going to do. So I have my messenger bird in there. He's carrying the blood of the people on his back. And then what does it look like when you're riding down the road and you look between the horse's ears? And there's a diagram of a horse. So you can see the head by the tail of the bird. And then it just goes around and around. I didn't know there was a diagram. So I'm doing all my research before I do these paintings. Next slide. In DC, when I was teaching at Montgomery College, this is one of the assignments. And I said, you know, let's do this assignment with sunglasses. And what do you see when you walk down the street? And every day when I left the apartment, I'd be walking down the street. There was always this couple. Sometimes they were asleep, sometimes they were sitting there. So I eventually put this in there using my perspective, and it has to be academic. So all of that sort of stuff. Anyway, value, that's charcoal. Next slide. So this is a mono print that my friend Kevin and I did one night, or one day when we were at work, and using my birds again. Next slide. Next one. Is that it? No? Reverting that to, and this is for sale purposes, so I wanted to make sure that I could still draw and paint like this. Next slide. When I would go and eat, and I would sit down and I'd start drawing whenever I was eating at Sweet Greens in DC. And I looked out there, you'll see all this activity. There's this bus, there's stoplights, and then there's a car, and everything changes so quickly. And so I had to sit and draw and draw and draw. Next slide. So I did this in North Dakota at the Plains Art Museum. I'm having a solo exhibition next February 2023. So if you're in the area, I'll have a show up there for probably a month. And this is what I did last fall. Next slide. So I was given a piece of ledger paper, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with it, and didn't want to get too involved in somebody else's story. So I'm putting my story in there. So I have my bird. He's walking down the road, and there's this kimimila, this butterfly, and it's getting some food there at that plant, that flower, and I just thought it'd be whimsical. So anyway, that's my ledger art. Next one. So I did this here, and still trying to fit into the environment that I'm in, and still trying to prove that I can draw and paint people. Next slide. This is an Oscar Howe, and it's a ledger. This is my story. And Oscar was such an influential artist, and it allowed a lot of us to do what we do today, and we owe it all to this man here. Next slide. So this talks about that bird and how it comes from the right, and it comes down, and then it's going to have a conversation with that guy on the left, and then whenever it has that conversation, it's going to leave. As it's leaving, it comes around to those two guys who are getting ready to ghost dance, and they're painting themselves, and they have that lightning on them. And then you go to that man standing there walking with a red towel. He's getting ready to go into Inikaha. He's ready to go into the sweat lodge. So before you did anything, you always went into sweat lodge, and you prayed about things. And you sang the songs and you did the things that you needed to do. So Creator will help you, whatever you're doing. So everything important starts out with sweat lodge. So anyway, it's kind of where I'm at today. I did this a couple weeks ago, a couple months, maybe 2 months ago. Okay, where are we at for time? Questions, comments? Okay, I think that's it, right?
Yes, that's it. So here,
Nice work, Gerald.
Thank you very much, Gerald.
Thank you.
It was a fascinating story. Your story is wonderful, and your journey that you've taken through your art and your spiritual journey.